So, hey, folks, I'm going to ask everyone, welcome, thanks for being here. I'm going to ask everyone to write and type in your name into the chat box. Also put down the agency you're working from, because I also invited 1 or 2 people outside of the agency just to kind of get some more numbers in, okay? So just give us the agency and your full name, please. So good afternoon and welcome everyone to Addiction Counselor Ethics. My name is Diane Padilla. I am your trainer for the next little while that we're together. And I'm gonna go through some of the logistics. And so certificate of completion, and this is where it gets really, really important for you folks. You know that you're gonna come to a training, but you're gonna wanna make sure that you have your certificate of completion. So this training is approved for 3 hours of CASAC, CPP, and CPS credentialing. And even though some of the requirements were expanded, some were changed in terms of what is, in terms of trainings for folks who are renewing their credentials or for the initial credentialing process for CASACs. This training will meet 3 out of the 6 hours that's required for renewal. For folks who are just getting their CASACs, this can help serve, I believe it's supposed to help serve 3 out of 50. And so in any case, as long as you're here and we can justify sending you that certificate, we'll make sure that you get those hours, that certificate sent to you. So part of doing this is that before we end, I will stop just long enough. I usually stop just long enough to do an evaluation. So my colleague is away right now, and internet is somewhat limited in terms of access. So while I may not be able to give you a link for an evaluation, please look out for a link from Tree Chapel. And she is the person who typically sends you these evaluations. She's the one who sends certificates. And so when she sends you the link, please submit it. It only takes about 1.5 minutes to do it. And so once you do that, we can justify giving you a certificate and even a copy of these slides if you're interested in having them. So the purposes of the Technology Transfer Centers, which is what I work for the Northeast Caribbean and Technology Transfer Center. It kind of aligns with the opioid response network that we have in our organization. And so we cover Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, and the Caribbean Islands. And so these Technology Transfer Centers is just another behavioral health workforce support that SAMHSA funds. So it's our way to bring new cutting edge information and making sure that you get your hours so you can keep your credentials and keep doing all that hard work that you're doing. And so the language matters is always here. Words have power. So this is essentially about evolving our terminology. For many of us who have been in the field for a long time, there's a lot of references and terms that have changed. And according to the DSM-5, if there's no other reference, just by the DSM-5 alone, we're using words very differently. You are credentialed substance abuse counselors, but the terminology in practice is substance use disorder. And that's just one example of many. And we may cover that as we go along. So most of you know how to use the chat box. We're going to take a break. We're going to have a 15-minute break. And let me just come out from here. Definitely want to make sure that you have some time to breathe and kind of debrief also. I like to make this interactive. And so if you don't mind, if you can participate, that would be fantastic. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But it can get boring if you don't participate. So I totally encourage you to get into a dialogue with me. So hopefully that's okay. It'll be kind of hard not to, especially if I put you in groups. So I'm going to end up doing that anyway. So, and if you don't respond, somebody will notice that. So I'm hoping that we can do this together. Anything else that you think we should be kind of speaking to here in terms of providing a safe space? What do you think you need as a person who's participating in this? And I'm really mindful of like what you think. Nothing? So anybody can say anything at any time and not a problem, right? How about the idea of confidentiality? How do you think we can apply that here in this training and in this atmosphere to make this your safe space? Because this is your space. How do you think that can apply? Tiffany?
What's said in the meeting stays in the meeting.
Real simple, just that simple. It should stay here. Can I just add something to that? So the other thing is that sometimes especially on ethics course, sometimes we share situations or, different things, like different experiences. It's not important to name the person, especially since most of us work together or work for the same organization. It's important to share about the situation, and we can keep the person's name confidential. Can we all agree to that? Cool. Easy. That was great. Thanks, Tiffany. All right. So okay, so I'm not sure the last time you've seen this, but I am going to, where is it? Okay. See if, I don't know if you can access this, but I put into the chat box the Canon, New York State CASAC Canon of Ethical Principles, and I wanted to say it exactly the way it's named, and just so you can have it as a handout. I know that most of us who were applying for CASAC credentials for the trainings and for the hours, we had to agree to these principles inside the application. So we're going to talk to how they talk to them more specifically in terms of how they apply. So what I'm going to ask you all to do right off the bat, I'm going to ask you to watch this video. This may or may not necessarily specifically apply in your setting, but I want you to consider what is being said and see if you can pick up on what concerns might be an ethical concern. What might be a situation that, what do you pick up from it? And so in that way we can discuss it. So see what you can pick up from this.
So a gardener wants to barter landscape and lawn maintenance for treatment for mild depression. He gets rid of crabgrass and she gets rid of crabbiness. Sorry, but I don't like it.
Why not? It's not illegal.
No, it's not, putting aside possible tax questions.
It's not unethical.
Could be.
Well, I've checked the ethical codes for psychologists, social workers, and marriage and family counselors, and not one prohibits barter as unethical.
True, but note the tone they take in the language of the sections that deal with it in the codes. They are all cautious about permitting it and warn about not allowing it to become exploitive of the client or patient, or else it would be unethical.
Yeah, but what's so special about a provision that cautions against exploitation of a client? I mean, wouldn't that be true of any professional act that exploits a client?
Yes, it would, but this is a very particularly tricky area. I'm very conservative about advising my clients in the area of barter. It could easily turn into exploitation without the therapist intending it as such.
Explain.
Joseph has always maintained that bartering therapy for services is complicated and by its very nature prone to exploitation.
I make a clear distinction between bartering therapy for services by the client and bartering therapy for goods, merchandise.
What's the distinction?
Here, I agree with Joseph. Let's say, for instance, that Bob landscapes Alice's home, maintains her lawn and yard, sprays her fruit trees, whatever. Suppose Bob just does a lousy job, or suppose he does an adequate job and the therapist is persnickety about her lawn. Does this become a therapeutic issue? Do they talk about it in therapy? Maybe.
Well, I mean, I can see how this could get complicated, but where's the exploitation?
It's not uncommon in certain phases of therapy for the client to try hard to please the therapist to gain approval.
Oh, yeah, I can see where this is going.
Exactly. Does Bob overdo it? Does he try to become the best doggone landscaper that Alice has ever seen? Does he do more for her than he would for any other customer?
So what did you guys think? What did you folks think about what did you folks think about it? About the video? What did you pick up on it? What's your understanding? How about we start with what's bartering?
Exchanging things for something in return, like giving something with getting something in return.
Right. That's exactly right. And that's actually, it's legal and it's actually done in some places. You folks don't do that? I know that's a
Like-
close-ended question response.
Like an incentive that could be considered, right? If we're looking at the
So bartering
Is
for
it
services
something-
is a way of paying for services. I know you folks don't typically do that.
Mhm.
You folks, your payment process involves insurance and being able to cover the services. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So let's just by chance, for some reason, you find yourself in a year or 2 years in a different job up in upstate New York or in another rural area in another state. This might come up. This actually does come up in upstate New York. And that's where the situation came from originally. So just saying. All right, so let's just think about this a little bit, because there's a lot of things, there's a lot of perceptions and a lot of things that come up that apply to different situations in your setting. And so what you heard here was about the issue of whether or not to allow someone to pay for their services, through some work. So what do you see are the issues with that? What are the concerns?
We need for everybody to participate, please.
What if the person isn't satisfied with the services?
If they are dissatisfied with the services? Okay. So what's usually your client's choice though? If you folks provide services to someone and they don't like your services, what can they do?
Go somewhere else.
Somewhere else. Mhm.
Get a
Okay, they can
referral.
go- All right. All right, so that's for that. So that's the choice. That's one potential choice for the client. What else can happen with the client when they're trying to trade services, which is not as quantified as an insurance or paying out of pocket? So what other concerns may come up when you're exchanging services, someone's effort for the services, for treatment services? What else comes up? What did you hear in the video?
I think that maybe like either the counselor or the client, there could be like a breach in like boundaries. So like either the client or the counselor might ask for something else that's outside of like the work scope, or they can also use that like against you. So like keeping that boundary, that fine line is easy to break because they might request something else, or like if you go above and beyond, they might think of it as more.
Yeah.
Than just the work services.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate that, Genesis. And so there's a lot of different ways that this can go. So how to quantify someone's efforts. What if, now in the video said it, well, one of the things is, one of the gentleman who spoke to how it's easy for the provider or the clinician to be able to exploit the client through those services. So if I wanted to go to say Cindy's my client, because I know Cindy's my client, and her mom, she's a hairdresser. And then I tell Cindy, I say, okay, so good, I'll see you in 2 weeks. By the way, did you put in a good word for me for your mother, because I'm gonna go get my hair done next week? Is there an ethical issue there? What? Are you serious? There is? I can't get a discount?
And there's already an
The
expectation.
client may expect you to do favors for her in return for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the lines get blurred, and Genesis spoke to it. The lines get blurred. We don't do that because we can exploit the client. The other thing is that opportunity to exploit the individual is not necessarily intentional, but can easily happen. We get caught up a lot in all the different things that we have to do on a daily basis, and we can easily segue into like, okay, that's for these services. Maybe I can have them do stuff for something else in another way, and kind of try to justify it in a professional way. It puts you in a very hard position. It also impacts your client. And then now you got the client, and Genesis talked about that too, and Tiffany too, about client might even want to bend over backwards just to try to please you, to make sure they get all these services that they think they're supposed to get. And that should not be the case. This is really about meeting their needs. It's not about them trying to make nice with you so you can do more for them. That blurs the lines between provider and client as well. And so some of the things that we
And
see,
you know, and that also works vice versa sometimes. Like a counselor be nicer to a client to get something in return, right?
so you're saying that the client, that the counselor would be, okay. So the counselor would be nicer to the client so they can get more services.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the exploitation part right there. And it's not necessarily intentional, but it can't be, So these are the blurred lines, but we don't want to put ourselves in these positions. And so many times, so that may be in rural areas, but if we're here and we're working with the folks in our communities, and oftentimes they're so grateful for the things we do or help access or help provide for them, that a lot of times they do want to do certain things to show their gratitude. And sometimes that can be a tricky situation for us. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more. So that was good. So tell me what you think. A couple of questions here. How do you define ethics? What is ethics to you? Does anybody know? Has anybody ever had to?
Can you
Go
hear
ahead,
me?
Sahib, you were going to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I think ethics is just like a universal code that all counselors, like no matter what type of profession you're in, you have to adhere to. It's like putting our clients first, making sure they're well, doing what we can for them. It's just something that all counselors, regardless of what population you should be aware of.
Okay.
Ethics is the fine line of boundaries of professionalism.
Say that again, Raphael.
The fine line of professionalism and boundaries.
Okay. Yes, they are. Even the professional boundaries trainings actually do apply to your ethics requirement, because it very much works with boundaries too. So let me just bring up what I have. Because ethics, so I put the Canon of Ethics guideline into the chat box. Have you folks ever had to refer to them in any situation? You don't have to give it, you don't have to tell me that, the situation. I'm just saying, have you ever had to refer to them? Other than the application that you sent in?
I have in supervision.
Okay, in supervision you review them and you're aware of them.
Right, because an incident can happen and then you gotta revisit it. Maybe like, I don't know, there could be so many, especially in this field, so many different, maybe a complaint from a client comes in and, we have to remind of, we have to keep, and I think Sahab said like the key word, like safe, to keep our clients safe. That's a huge, I think that really speaks a lot in the Canon Code of Ethics.
I think it's for our clients and ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you have to watch what you say sometimes to the clients, because sometimes you might think what you're saying is okay, but it could be offensive to a client. So it's also on your deliverance too.
Okay. I think it's all of the above. It's hard to kind of sometimes it's hard to understand what the boundaries are. It's not necessarily clear cut. So what the Canon Code of Ethics, what we're required, according to New York State OASIS, we're required to sign off on them. We're required to read them, understand them, and keep in mind that they apply when we go through certain situations or experiences where questions come up, when we're not sure what to do. And what if in the moment the supervisor is not readily available? So you do have guidelines. And so the reality is, are we actually in a position to make informed ethical decisions at every given time? Not at any, but at every given time. Can we make informed ethical decisions? Sometimes, as Raphael and Tiffany said, sometimes those lines are blurred. Sometimes we're not sure. Sometimes we have to run it by somebody. It's something, it can make sense for when they tell us to be familiar with the policies and the protocols for our agency. So we understand how we can behave and things we can do in different situations.
Basically, if you feel something is not right, most of the time it's not right. If you, let's say you're in a session and you feel that at that moment something seems off, 9 out of 10 times it's off. So go with your gut feeling. 9 out of 10 times your gut, it's gonna lead you right.
I'm going to say that that's a little subjective. Do you know what I mean by I say subjective? It means that everybody has a different perception and different experiences and different knowledge levels. And so what can seem a certain way for one person can seem a different way for another. So part of the reason is your expertise is great and you've been in the field because you're really good at it. But part of the reason why you get the Canon Code of Ethics, why OASIS makes sure that you have that, is that the lines do get blurred and sometimes we see things differently depending on who you ask. So OASIS or your discipline, even not OASIS, even when you get into the discipline and in the addiction field, when you get into the social work field, when you get therapy, whatever, even SERPAs and CARCs, everyone has their own code of ethics because there's certain things that are expected by the discipline itself. And so some things should not be a question. So just to make sure that our gut feeling is correct, we have those code of ethics. Because if we're not feeling well on a day, if we're overwhelmed, if we've been working 3 weeks straight covering for two other colleagues, and things have been happening in our agency, and we've been pretty overwhelmed, the decision-making process on our part might not be as objective as when you're doing okay, as like when you just first came back from vacation. So those are the different conditions that our disciplines take into account, and that's why they provide us the opportunities and the guidelines so we can have the opportunity so we can go back and refer to them. So that can help us in our decision making. We don't always need them, but it's good to have. It's one of those things like, it's good to have, you don't always need them, but it's good to have in case you do, even if you don't use them. And so, and sometimes when the question comes up and you need a discussion, that can help. So let me go to here. Let me go through a couple of slides and I'm going to bring you to some questions, some core principles, really is what I call it. And so, let's see. So ethics are concerned with human conduct. We know that. With moral decision making, and it's the moral piece that gets subjective. What might be moral for one person, morally based, may not necessarily be morally based for another person. But all different factors kind of come in together so a situation can be decided on. So it's not always clear cut and concise. Human beings aren't. We're very fluid, we're very dynamic, and things are always flowing. And if you think about your setting, things are always moving and and every day does not look the same. So neither do the people you provide services to, neither do we or our colleagues. And so we do what's best and what's in the best interest of that person we're providing services to. And that's really the idea. And so let's go here. So let's talk about ethics. It's an established set of guidelines, as you folks refer to, from which to critically evaluate the choices and actions that you could take as a professional when working with people with substance use disorders. And so there's so many different variables depending on the person. Not everybody looks exactly the same when they first come into treatment. Everyone may be from the same. If you had 3 people from the same block who grew up together, knowing each other in the same block, and they all meet the criteria of substance use disorder, and they're all in your organization, they will all have different issues and see things differently. And you will have to be, and because we do person-centered care, we tailor our services to meet the unique needs of each individual. And because of that, we need to be able to have a set of guidelines that we can refer to. But Raphael, you also mentioned professional boundaries. Professional boundaries are those that are distinguishable between a client and a counselor. And so ethics has to do with how to evaluate different ways to address situations. Professional boundaries has a lot to do with how it influences that relationship between you and the client. And so they intersect consistently. And so it affects the therapeutic relationship. And we're going to talk about a couple of those things right now. So primary functions of code of ethics has to do with safeguarding the welfare of patients and clients, guarding the privacy and the confidentiality piece, and we're going to speak to that. Being able to provide quality service. And what does that mean, and what might that look like? We also want to represent our professional qualifications with transparency. We want to make sure that we don't say we are more than what we are. So transparency is key here. So some basic ethical principles include, there are four or five that I'm going to cover here. And so autonomy. The principle of autonomy assumes that the individuals have the right to decide how to live their own lives, as long as their actions don't interfere with the welfare of others. So autonomy in decision-making is whether the individual has the necessary information to make a sound decision. What is your idea from that? What comes up for you from that? Do we tell clients what to do?
No,
We're not supposed to, but do we actually do that?
We
Yeah.
try to make
we encourage them
suggestions.
to
We
figure out.
have, yeah.
Right, we try to make suggestions.
This is a safe environment.
Yeah.
I promise I
Let's
won't
be
tell
real.
anybody. I'm not telling anybody. It's okay.
Let's be real.
No,
Right.
I try
but
to
the
make
reality is-
suggestions. I try to make suggestions. I don't tell them what to do. I just try to make suggestions.
So that brings up that point. How you frame it and how you approach someone to give information is very important, because you don't want a client to say, well, Dominique told me, my counselor Dominique told me that I should go over here. And meanwhile, you were doing your darndest to make a suggestion, but you were using a great tone of voice. You were working with the conversation, and it was still taken that way. So,
Right.
all right, Tiffany, what were you gonna add?
I was gonna say, it also depends on the relationship with the client,
Yeah, the context of the relationship has a lot to do with that. But I would still suggest, and I would still suggest that how you frame the information is a really important part. And so, okay, so when we think about autonomy, so the autonomy has to do with the client's choice. Are there situations where the client does not have the capacity to make their own decision? What would that be? What would that look like?
would that be sort of like if they're mandated by ACS or probation or parole?
No, because the court can mandate someone to your program, and they would have to pass the program as part of the agreement they do with the courts. So your problem-solving courts, drug courts, whatever. But do they have to agree with an extra with the services that you're providing?
No.
If you offer certain things, even if they're mandated, will we tell them or will we offer?
Yeah, we offer it.
Right. So think about it that way. So what we're really doing is we try to inform, depending on the situation. We're going to do, based on the screening and the assessments, we're going to have a diagnosis. We're going to have work a treatment plan. But it does have a lot to do. Can you guys hear that? Oh, good. So it does have a lot to do. No, outside my window, there's a lot of noise. So it does have a lot to do with what they're willing to do. A person can go through your program, actually complete your program, and not make any kind of change in their life. Is that true? Yeah, right? So if you are using your skill set, your MI communication skills, and you're bringing up situations that seem to be a part of their life, or the issues or risk factors in their life, you could say, well, there are some options that are available for you, and you can provide the information on either option or all three options, and they will have to make an informed decision. That makes sense, right? That's tradition. That's supposed to be the protocol, right? So that's the thing. So what happens if, like, for example, somebody who has a substance use disorder, say they have a severe level of more moderate to severe level of a substance use disorder, any one of them, and they could experience poor judgment, either because of the substance use, because of the maybe the kind of substance they've been using, how long they've been using, and maybe, and in some cases they may not have the capacity. But it's not fair to the client to allow It's not fair to the client to allow the full autonomy and decision making on to the counselor unless the person is like going to harm themselves. And so what you might want to do is at least be transparent and make sure that it's clear to the individual if they can't, their capacity in terms of being able to make decisions for themselves. There's some mental health issues that might prevent somebody from making a healthy decision for themselves. In that case, what would be the factor that would be incorporated in your treatment plans or when you consult this, when you do counseling with this person? Who would be the decision maker for them?
Maybe someone that's like a legal guardian or something like that, where they're taking care of the individual,
Exactly.
or like a caseworker, a social worker, whatever it is.
Right. And then that person would be documented, and then you will use those two persons to provide the information to. Now, for a lot of folks who have substance use disorder, sometimes we don't think they are making healthy decisions for themselves. And yet they can respond to your questions and they can choose to either be in your programs or not be in your programs. And it's easier for me to just put this in the context of folks who are not mandated. And so if somebody comes in, but they don't want to do certain things, it's the client's choice. Is that correct? Okay. And so sometimes we may think, well, they don't really know what they're doing. Does that really matter? What do we work with? We work with what the client tells us? Or do we try to convince them?
We meet them where they're at,
But
kind of.
we work with what they tell us. That's all we can do.
Exactly. And so it's the same thing as Sahib was saying. Yeah, we work with what they tell us and we meet them where they're at. And part of what you do in counseling is to not just give information, you help to provide some types of conversations that could be raise awareness, can be very motivating, can certainly hit, the things that some goals that they want to meet, not just being abstinent from substance use, but also to meet other doors, other goals, maybe nurture relationships with family members and such. And so all of that in context is part of the services that you provide, does allow that person to make decisions for themselves, even if we don't think that they're making the healthiest one. One of the things that can help us is to remember that when folks first come into treatment, especially in the early stages of recovery, their brain waves are not, their brain processes, those neurological processes are not working correctly. But the programs that you have are developed very specifically to help the client evolve. And it does help to meet them where they're at, and it doesn't go like real fast. You don't automatically go to OSHA, you don't automatically go to college, you don't automatically move to point C and D if you just got here. And so, but we do take into account, after we give them information, and we are transparent, they're able to make decisions for themselves. Yes,
The question I have regarding that is specifically clients that are adolescents, and I mean ones that are like 15, 16, they're not legally consent of age. So in terms of their autonomy and working with the parents, what would be your opinion on like best to support them? Because sometimes, I have an adolescent client, I want to support her and I want to make sure I respect her autonomy, but she's also collaborating with her parents during the process. So like, do you have any suggestions for that?
I was to say it's still a person-centered approach. It's still a person-centered treatment process that you use, whether they're adolescents or adults. So what is the goal that they want to meet? Where do they see themselves? And then you have to, and I would say that you're supposed to be encouraged to provide the services according to their developmental stage. Like you won't necessarily use the same exact approach as you would for an adult, as you would for an adolescent, because of the different stages that they are in, but it's still a person-centered approach. Their decision and their involvement actually is part of the motivation for them to succeed in the change process. Yeah. And I was saying, and just as a side note, it's like one of the things about youth is that they don't get choices. Their choices are not often recognized or respected. And when you do, you have a huge opportunity for rapport and relationship building. That helps a lot with that community. Sometimes autonomous decision making is when the individual does have the necessary information to make a sound decision. It's really how you present. We do this works so often that sometimes we might hear ourselves say, no, you should probably do this. You should probably do that. No matter how kind and loving and caring that you are, telling someone I would suggest that we frame it as an option, instead of, so somebody doesn't receive it as telling them. And so there are times though, let me bring up this slide. What about times where, say, our own personal values get in the way? How many folks work with clients around methadone and buprenorphine treatment? All of you, right? So many times in the field, and for the last, I don't know, couple of few decades, one of the struggles that the discipline, the addiction field has had is that many of us didn't really believe in medications for opioid or alcohol use disorder. We didn't believe in the MAT so much. So personally, we didn't necessarily suggest it. So sometimes our biases come out. So one of the things I'll tell you, for instance, so years ago, before the laws came out, where I work with drug courts too. And so the leaders are usually the judges. And if the judge did not feel that medication-assisted treatment was appropriate, they wouldn't allow their team to offer it as an option to a person who was participating in a drug court program. Now, the thing with that was that a lot of people are misunderstanding how that works. Medications work to stabilize the body, and so that the person has an opportunity with the other program services that you provide to be able to kind of relearn how to do certain healthy things for themselves and have like some kind of decent quality of life. And so judges did not understand for a long time. They kind of saw it as a kind of a replacement. They didn't really have good information to go on themselves. So they thought it was kind of like condoning, substance use, which is not the case. It still is not the case. And even many providers and like yourselves, are confused about that. So sometimes their biases got in the way of having someone actually get that needed treatment. I'll give you an example. There was a case one time where an individual, and so I work with different courts across the country, and there was one judge who did admit after, and regretted these, but he learned after a while that he was really trying hard to get this individual who kept relapsing to, he decided that instead of going into the program one day, he put the individual in jail. So that person can, get clean on their own, and detox, and then can come into the program. The problem is that he didn't have the research and the science and the information about what an individual goes through when they don't have the drug in their system and they're going through withdrawals. That's a pretty horrible thing to have someone go through. There are no predictors, but I've never heard of an easy detox process on someone's own, when it comes to opioids, especially if they've been using for a long time. And so it had eventually become the law that in the states across the country, that drug courts had to provide medications for assisted treatment or for opioid use disorders as an option. Because we learned the hard way that people actually relapse and die behind this, and we start to learn the science. What happened there was an example of the person's bias. A lack of information can build bias. For some of us, let's see, if we have people, let's say we have addiction counselors who may be in recovery or understand recovery to be an abstinence-based process. For folks, for some of them who are not informed about medications for assisted treatment, these folks may be biased and may not offer that as an option. And so sometimes when it comes to the autonomy, making decisions for the client's perspective, offering all options available for that individual without bias is important and ethical, an ethical requirement on our part. So it's not about us including what our own thinking about a particular option is in terms of what the hat you wear professionally. Professionally, you have to provide all options. But sometimes that's when the autonomy of the client can get compromised, when we don't give all the information. And that's not, and that's unethical. So is that clear for everybody? Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So how about, let me bring this one up. It assumes responsibility to improve and enhance the welfare of others. In other words, do good. In other words, having the best interests of the person at heart. So we will always want to be able to do what's best for the person, But we also want to consider, what's best for the person has to also be what the person believes is best for them too. It's not like we dictate or we shouldn't be dictated. Building on what we just spoke about in terms of being able to offer information so your client can make an informed choice. So they have to also consider that it's good for them too, because then even though we're trying to do good, because we know we have experience and this has been successful, the steps that you want to take for the client, you've done it with other people, it's been successful before, but we don't want to take their autonomy either. If they choose not to follow through or not to access a particular service option that you are making available, that is their choice. The other thing is addressing potential paternalism. What does that mean? What does paternalism mean in terms of what you do as a counselor? You don't know?
Could that be like mothering?
Making decisions without their consent?
Yeah, kind of. Have that you folks we're always talking about, we talk a lot about power and privilege and balancing out the authority that folks have and trying to balance that out when you talk to a client, right? Or when you to develop that partnership, right? So you got a lot of power in your hands. Did you know that? You may not have the power to give yourself a raise, but you got power in a lot of other different ways with your clients. In other words, you're a person of authority and you can actually say, no, this is not good for the person, not provide that information. Or how about if you use your authority to not allow someone to get into a particular service? So sometimes we want to do what's best for somebody, and we think this is that considering what we know about the person and their capacities, their attitudes, that they're not necessarily in a position to take advantage of certain programs or certain services we have available. So what if we tell a colleague of ours who's in charge of some opportunities, some services that allow clients to come in and maybe once or twice a month go to I don't know, engage in some kind of activity, some kind of services outside, and they're supposed to be residential. And you tell them, well, they can't really go because they don't really have, they're not stable enough to be able to go outside without it, helping, making them activated or getting them, or they're not stable enough to kind of follow through on learning that skill to be able to go into that program afterwards. And so we don't tell the client, we just tell our colleague. That's an example of paternalism. That's when we use our authority because we don't think that person has what it takes to get involved in a particular option that might be an option that might be available for most clients like themselves. Or we think that person, or we have an attitude, or there's some bias on our part where we don't think maybe we had a situation with the person, we had some words and we don't think, because of that, we kind of want to punish them. They got to wait now before they can get into that program. So these things, paternalism has to do with when you use your authority to limit options or limit something for a particular client. It's really the kind of thing that could be bias. And so if a counselor feels justified in telling another professional that they're not a candidate for that particular program, is it because the clinician, or you as a provider are assuming that they are not ready for it, that they can't comply for it? Or is it because, say, I am perceiving that the person has an attitude problem, has anger issues, and now it's not the right time for them? And then I don't tell the client. It's paternalism. And so the reality here is really about we have to bring things up with our clients and get their point of view and get their feedback and see if they're willing to go to and so see if they're willing or they're open to a particular option. We don't want to tell anybody what to do, but we do present in the treatment plan. We have certain services that we offer, certain programs that are offered at different times at different points of their treatment process. in your agency. And so you want to include the client's perspective. You want to include their choice. You also want to make sure that you don't dismiss or disregard someone, because we want to respect their dignity. We're supposed to be giving respectful services. And I'm really happy that our discipline has evolved the way it has, because years ago, those TC type of settings sometimes presented those opportunities for providers to be paternal in how they provided services. And it was not based on science. There was a lot of bias at the time, and folks were doing what they thought was best for the person without getting the person's feedback or input. The biggest factor in successful outcomes for any client has always been their participation, their willingness to participate in the programs. Their commitment to their process has been a huge part of it. And it's usually involved and based on the interactions or the relationship they have with you guys. That's how much of an impact you folks have when you engaging them in kind of a partnership as opposed to telling somebody what to do. And think about all the successes that you've had. That's where that has come in. It's the part that you play when you connect with them and that connect to them. So tell me about, let me put this one up. Non-maleficent, do no harm. How do you understand that, the do no harm principle in your world? How has that come to be? You know, has that ever been reflected where that's been a challenge with some of the folks that you work with? This is supposed to be about us protecting the well-being of the person that we're providing services to. And so we can't, you know, we don't want to justify providing certain services or certain options for folks where it can possibly hurt someone. And so the principle of do no harm is a holistic perspective. It focuses on harms and benefits and reminds us not to rush in to a decision that has to do with someone's well-being. What do you think that has come up for you? Or where have you seen it in situations in the time that you've been doing this work? Maybe I'll give you an easier question. Do you know where this comes from? You folks ever heard of the Hippocratic Oath? We borrow from there. Okay. That was like 2,400 years ago. That when Hippocrates, being a medical professional at the time, a philosopher, and a whole bunch of other things, was the first one to speak to the principle of doing no harm to people in our care. And so the concept does not necessarily refer to immediate circumstances. Do no harm means that we want to consider the well-being of the person, even beyond what we do right now for the person, even beyond our intervention. So sometimes what we want to access for somebody, or we want to offer as an option that somebody can consider, we also want to think of the long-term results or long-term impact for the individual. And so some people think that sometimes what some people think is like, some people may not engage in certain interactions or certain services with clients because they don't want to do any harm. Now, let me ask you this. Let me just be specific. What if you had to address an issue, like, for instance, a suicide ideation with your client? We've had some providers that, because they feel uncomfortable or ill-equipped, they won't address that with some folks. So how do you think the principle of do no harm applies there?
You mean
You gotta
like
get
letting the
someone
client
that, see, if you can't do it, and if you feel that you can't do it, you get someone that will be able to help the client at that moment. So that way, what you gonna do won't hurt the client.
I'm not clear on what
If
you're
you
saying,
feel,
Raphael.
if you feel you're not equipped to help the
Okay.
client with that situation, then what you do is you get someone that can.
Okay, all right, that's good. Thank you. That's clearer. I appreciate that. So you do see a situation, you may not be equipped to handle it, but you get someone else to address it. Okay, all right. And then eventually you, at least you can get the skills and the training to be able to do it yourself. But that's good. But stepping away completely and not saying something,
That makes more harm
yeah,
than good.
yeah, that can create harm. Yeah, yeah. And not doing anything at all, it's not the right thing. And unfortunately, and I know that's a hard thing because I do trainings around that. I know it's very difficult to know what to say, what to do. And many people think that, you know, like say for suicide, like if you have a conversation about it, that you're going to push the person to do it. That's not true. All the research for years has been showing that that's not true at all. That it's actually better to actually support the person, bring it up, have a conversation. It's just a matter of how you do it. How you do it, okay? Which can essentially intervene, you know, and help that person to not follow through. And so feeling that kind of support, and that's a whole other training. But that doing nothing is not doing the harm. And then sometimes when we do something, like say we connect with other folks, it could do long-term harm. I'll give you another example. So in one of my past career moves, so I had a client who she was a victim of partner violence, and I was very clear, and I knew that. And my colleague had her partner in her program. And so what she ended up doing was not telling me that some kind of transference thing was going on with her. And when she found out, she sent the individual home. They were supposed to go home together. Her choice, my client's choice was to stay in that relationship. I have to support and respect that and work with that. And so what my colleague did, because she was going through changes behind it, she sent him home. The do no harm principle here would have long-term effects if this person, if we continue to do that, because my client can get hurt because someone was pushed away. What did you tell her? What do they know? Why did I have to leave without you? So the do no harm principle came up. Unfortunately, transference, you know, she had to do a whole thing with the supervisor because she has some unresolved issues on herself. But sometimes what we do can put somebody at risk. What we don't do also put somebody at risk. And the whole idea is not to do any harm. So we got to think things through. It's really, especially you folks have been doing this for anybody who's been doing this for any kind of length of time. We kind of know what are the options, what are the services, what are the things, the community resources that we can connect people to, and that can be helpful. And so we kind of want to think it through for every single individual to ensure that it may not just, it's not an immediate resolution to whatever situation they got, but what's going to happen over the long term, because we want their well-being to still be at first foremost, you know, the most important thing for us with them. So non-maleficence speaks to the no harm principles that came from the medical discipline, and we've been able to borrow it here, the addiction fields and social work fields and therapy and so on. Any comments? Anything else that comes to mind? Make sense so far? Okay. All right. So how about the principle of justice? Raphael, would you mind reading it for us?
The principle of justice assumes impartiality and equality. It means that a counselor would treat all clients equally and give everyone the due portion of services. Equitable care, culturally appropriate, trauma-informed affirmative.
Very good. Thank you. So what if, right? Well, first of all, are you folks, I was there say that you folks provide equitable care, that your programs, you work with diverse communities. I know where you're situated, and I see the representation from staff. So I'm going to give you a scenario. What if the counselor learns that the individual they're working with has an issue of fantasizing with little girls, but has never actually done anything about it, right? And the issues or issues with older people, because older people used to beat them when they were young. But you're taking care, but they're taking care of either a child or they're taking care of their grandma. What might that concern you? How would that concern you as a counselor? Let's just say that you're a parent. You're not just a professional, you're a parent. You have children, whether they're grown, they were little at one time, or if you have little children. You have a person in your client caseload, and part of their issues is that fantasizing of being with little kids. They've never actually done so. And some of us have clients who actually have done so, and we still, these are the folks that we're providing services to. What happens? What do you do with you? What if you're as a parent kind of kicks up? What are your options in terms of providing services to this individual?
You still have to provide services. What you have to do is you have a that's what you have a supervisor for, to have that supervision and speak with the supervisor concerning any issues you may have with that.
Right. You have to, address your own counter transference. Thanks, Raphael. Thanks, Saeed. So what you want to do is, if you are feeling limited, your own awareness is so important. How you feel when your feelings kind of are triggered, that's a red flag for you to look at where you're at. It doesn't mean you can't work with the person, but it might mean that you can't work with the person right now. And so we want to be able, we're still supposed to be providing the best services possible. So we want to make sure, that our stuff doesn't kind of get in the way. So we could limit contact, or we can actually provide barriers and be influenced by that, because we may be parents, or because maybe we have gone through something when we were children. That's not something my supervisor is going to know, but we as a provider, we may know some of our past might kick up. So what do you do with that? Who is the person who is responsible to provide services to? It's your client, right? If we are if our capacity is being limited, or is kind of things are triggering, we need to take a step back. You take a step back. There's supervision, like Raphael said, but there's also there might be an opportunity to deal with unresolved issues, because that person is entitled to the same quality services as everyone else that you provide the services to. But those are really good situations, to tell you the truth. And even though it sounds kind of hard a little bit, because it lets you know that, okay, there's something that you need to work on, so you can be in position to be objective and supportive of anybody that is on your caseload. So that's a good thing for you in terms of professional development. So justice is really about, let me bring this up. So justice is not being, trying to be impartial and quality services for folks, no matter what their background is, no matter what their issues are when they're presenting, no matter what their mental health status are, but a lot of times with justice, what we've learned over decades and decades and decades of disparities, which happens mostly, it typically happens with people with racial, ethnic, gender identity, transgender identity backgrounds, or people who are under the poverty level. These are the folks, and these are the communities that, and more, that tend to be underserved and have a lack of resources, a lot of the times because of the communities they identify with, and the issues that they present with. So can it be honestly said that a clinician does not have a favorite client? These are questions that come up when it comes to justice. Are we being more favored with a particular client that becomes the ideal client that seems to be evolving, and it's like that success story that you wish all your clients are? Are we behaving differently with that person than we are with someone else? That's something to consider, right? Are there clients who we may want to limit their access? And it's a little bit like the Maleficent's issues that I presented before, because you're persons of authority and you can actually control certain things, whether or not some person can have access to certain things or not. And when we justify something, do we have a sound reason to be able to document and even run our supervisor why, the access to this person, to this program doesn't meet their particular needs at the moment. We want to make sure that we're not part of that. Are there policies or agency practices that limit access to a program? Are folks actually able to get into different programs? Is there like that equal opportunity access for everyone? And there should be. Sometimes gender identity, sexual orientation can play a part in being able to provide certain services. There are many resources in the communities that have a certain criteria that need to be met. I will definitely agree that not enough resources are available for everyone from diverse backgrounds and lifestyles. The idea here is that it's not us that is limiting access to these resources when they are available. That's the whole point of that. And so we want to remain objective. And so like the Justice Center, you folks already know, maintains a registry of reports of abuse and neglect and significant incidents involving, situation with service providers. And we want to make sure that when something does happen, when there's an issue, sometimes we can be called on it. So if someone is reporting us because we're being biased or we're being discriminatory, that's a huge issue. So many times agencies can be addressed by the Justice Center if certain programs are only available for certain communities. And so that wouldn't be fair to the other community members. And so justice has to do with impartiality and doing your darndest to provide services across the board. And so, so that's the justice piece. Veracity. Truth-telling is essential to the trust between counselor or provider and the client. Is there any situation where you ever had to lie to a client? Is there any situation that warrants lying to a client? No. No, so I don't ever say, I don't like to use the word honesty, but I do like to use the word transparency. Transparency is key. One of the things that helps the clients is when you're being, totally upfront.
Yeah, there is times when, as let's say for instance, they need something taken care of, and at that moment you can't do it right then and there, but you see that, if you will let them know that it'll be done just to appease them and make them feel comfortable and secure, then yeah, go ahead and do it. 'Cause that way, it'll make them feel good that they know someone's taking care of them. Sometimes clients can feel a little more secure with their problems. And if that at that moment, it might be a crisis to them, even though it's not a crisis. You know what I'm
So you're
saying?
saying you would lie
It's
to
like,
say, yeah, you're gonna do something and you're not gonna do
taking
it?
care of right now for you. It's not so much lying, but it's just giving them a sense of security.
So you can't say that it says, I can't do it right now, but I'm gonna get to it. You can't say that?
You can, but it depends on how well you know the client. Because remember, sometimes clients they don't know how to deal with the I want it now syndrome.
That's true, but don't you show them how to work with that? Don't they learn that with you?
That doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't happen overnight. So that's in those instances, it's okay to
So
lie.
if you just meet a client and at that moment, that's a client that you haven't worked with, yeah, then you will have to do that. And then so
Why can't you just tell them? Why can't you just tell them? It says, well, I'm gonna do. I'll do my
But
best.
it
Like
could
to
create
try
more
to
harm
do
than
that.
good.
I'm not sure I can do it right now.
It could create more harm than good because it might make them take off and
How does everybody else feel about that?
I think it could create a problem either way, because if you lie to the client, you tell them you're gonna do it now, and they find out you didn't do
Right.
it when you said you was gonna do it, then that breaks trust. So now I can't
Right.
trust you because you told me you were gonna do it now and you didn't. So I think being honest is the best way to go, because it builds that trust, even though they may want it right now. If you can't do it right now, just let them
Right.
know. you know.
Mhm.
9 out of 10 times, I'm quite sure we've all done that.
No, I haven't. If I can't do something right then and there, I tell them I can't do it. I'll get to it, but I can't do it right now.
So I want you to think about this, how a different way of addressing a situation like that, because your clients are in a place where they're very limited and vulnerable, and their brain does not work the way your brain works. And so they have to relearn a lot of ways of processing information, understanding how to go through certain efforts to address certain things, to behave in certain ways, and understand what those options are. But a person in your position and our position, to be able to develop a rapport and a relationship, for us to be trustworthy and transparent, we can show them how that works simply by being that. So because what happens is, to us, when we do certain things, we get caught up in certain habits, that kind of starts to underscore everything what we do. There should always be a reason to be transparent. And that's a way of us respecting that client. And part of the respecting and the dignity of that individual is being transparent. That's not an opinion, that's in your Canon Ethical Principles. Just so you know. Okay, so I kind of understand this problem solving in the moment, but you may want to consider the long-term effects of that. And so it's easier kind of like to just be upfront. It's like, okay, I can't do it right now. I know I have to, but I can't do it right now. I says, give me a chance, we'll talk about it in a minute. Let me go to take care of this and we'll come back and talk about it. Some approach that includes that, you know what, I heard what you said. I know we talked about it. I haven't done it yet. There's reasons for that. But I'm not saying no, let me talk about it. We'll talk about it. Give me a chance to go take care of this and I'll come back to you. And still being transparent. But if you don't come through with something that you promised later on, it can hurt the relationship. It can hurt their trust in you. And then the other thing is also tends to for some folks, it can be representing how the agency practices or is as a whole.
Good. I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to jump in there. It's true what Rafa, because Cindy and I are the ones, as supervisors, are the ones that the clients come to at the end of the day when a client is promised that they're going to be helped and it doesn't come through. And you might not even realize that you're doing it, but it has happened. So just being mindful of your time and your capability, right? If you're not able to do it, then that's why I said we have care management and things like that. But yeah, it does happen. And then they feel, the clients feel like, oh, they just say that they're going to help and they're not really helping. And then they go another place and they be like, oh no, they don't help us over there up in Manhattan. And it just creates this trickle down effect for us.
Yeah,
Also, to add to that, if, let's say you do have a client and you already have that rapport with that client, you see what I'm saying? Then yeah, there are times when you can do that because it's gonna get done, but at that moment it can't. But just for the client at that moment, for the client to feel comfortable and safe at that moment, it's okay to do that because you have that rapport with that client. That client knows that you will take care of him because you already have built that with that client. It's a personal relationship. A lot of times you don't realize this is a personal relationship that you have built with these clients. You know what I'm saying? These clients, if you do for them, they know that they can come to you just about for anything, and you will take care of them. So it's a personal decision. It's I mean, time management is important, and you gotta know how to move around that. That's very important.
You can actually tell somebody like, I have these crises I gotta take care of. I said, but once you hang around and we'll talk about it. It's the not being transparent. And let me just call it what it is. Isn't it the lying? If you're gonna do something and not actually follow through, just to keep them, make them feel comfortable in the moment, maybe make them feel comfortable in the moment is being real with them. Being totally real and letting them know, listen, that's a challenge right now. We talked about that, but we can talk about it some more. You wanna give me a few minutes when I'm finished here? But that way you don't put yourself in a position that you don't come through on, because it comes back at you. It's not just the agency, but it comes back at you, because that you want to build relationship on trustworthiness. And those are the principles that your behavior shows them how what they should mimic, so they can practice that in their world. Sahib?
I kind of have a question that might be a little bit off topic when it comes to transparency. So I'm thinking about specifically, let's say we're being referred to a client where it didn't work out with a previous counselor, a previous program, whatever it is, and we're aware of what happened, right? But the client comes to the session, they don't talk about it. The reason why I'm bringing this up specifically is, just to make sure this makes sense, is even if we know things about our client, we should wait until they're comfortable or ready to talk about it before we jump into it, right? Even if it's like a change with a counselor, or...
I think it depends on the situation, because there are certain things that you might have to bring up, might be time sensitive. I think it depends on the details of that situation. I think that's too general of a question, but I appreciate it. I would tell you, so say when someone is coming, you folks decide for yourself, and you have supervision, decide for yourself. Your Canon of Ethical Principles, your disciplines, and part of all these core principles that are underscored, that are foundational to ethics in the first place, has us encouraged to be transparent, respectful, clear, and totally about their well-being. If our best way, maybe we can consider more than one way to address the situation.
Another thing that you can throw there, another carrot that you can throw there, is you have to know your limits. Because as well as your limits as far as what you can do.
Yep.
Because sometimes things are beyond your control.
That's true.
And you cannot do certain things for that client because it's beyond your control.
So what do you do in a situation like that, which is great? That's a very good thing that you just came up. What do you do in a situation like that?
I just do it out there. Let somebody else pick it up.
You passed the buck. Okay, let's go. No, that's the real situation here. So if there's certain things you can't do, would we not address that right from the beginning when we first meet the individual? I mean, we have an opportunity when we first meeting someone, whether they're mandated or not, when we're covering and running through, the do's and don'ts of the programs, what they're willing to do, what they can expect. Aren't we letting them know, listen, in my capacity, what I'll do my best to do is this, and that.
Yes, and then if we can't do it, we refer them to someone who can.
Right. If it's something within promises, it's if we can't do certain things, maybe we could have other options. Maybe that's out of our purview. But we tell them that it is. But maybe we can connect with somebody who does. Maybe that doesn't fall under our discipline as an addiction counselor.
Well, hope you can connect with somebody that'll get it done.
So what's an example of that?
I would say for our program, a lot of clients ask about housing, and I don't think anyone here specifically is a housing specialist. So we might have to refer them to carrier management, another program, have their insurance, but we can't provide that. We can't give them a place to live. So it's important to say that from the beginning.
Yeah, so you could say that in the beginning, it says, so we do give wraparound services here. Say that it can include, housing, referrals. It can include employment, getting employment skills. It can include maybe referrals to other programs or other services to help that individual in other areas. It can't. We'll do our best to meet your needs. Why can't we just frame it like that? And if you know some resources, let us know so we can help with that. If we can't, we'll let you know that we can't, and we'll let somebody else, and then we'll get someone else to help you. But being transparent about what you can and can't do is part of that trust. It's also part. Say you had Say you had a client that you just meeting, and just kind of getting the hang of the fact that they've been impacted by trauma. Let's just say that. So a person impacted by trauma, what is the first thing that we have to consider when we're working with a person who is trauma impacted? What's the first thing?
Having empathy and building trust.
That's in your approach. Sahib, that's perfect. It's their safety. They have to, that's the first thing with everybody, but especially with someone who we know has trauma issues, right? So one of the first things where we have to be is we provide a safe space, that we're a safe person to work with, that we are working in a safe environment, that they could feel comfortable enough in a safe space so they can come through with their part in their process. So if we're not, folks who are traumatized need to understand that they need to know what's coming. That transparency is so important. Surprises are not good. You know, if you promise something and you don't do it, you know, their sense of safety can be compromised. These are all things that we should consider for everybody in general, but I would tell you, with people who are traumatized, this is something, one of the first things that you are encouraged to provide them. And so that's why that part is so important. And it's also about the dignity. It's also about their being able to create a space where they can also grow. Do me a favor, let's not talk over each other. Just wait when each other finishes speaking. Go ahead.
What I come to find that's, I say helpful, is to be able, for you to be able to put yourself in that seat. See yourself in that seat.
Mhm.
And as well as, you know, how would you feel if you would have needs as well, the needs that that person has, and you would come for somebody with those needs, you would want them to be taken care of. So as a counselor, then you would put yourself in a position where you're really going to help this client.
Within your capacity. I totally get that. Within your capacity.
Absolutely.
Right. You folks make such a difference in so many people's lives, and you bring so much to it. You also want to make sure that your clients know that you're human, because sometimes when certain things fall out of place that is out of your control, you want to make sure that it doesn't come back at you, you know. But it also helps them to understand how to navigate through their world, because their safe space can be with you, and outside they may not have a safe space. How do they deal with that? That's what they get from you too. So safety is a huge issue. So when we do that, when we think about truth telling, when we think about transparency, you know, we want to consider all that. If somebody were like, let's just think about, if somebody, I'm going to take a case where it's a little bit different. If we were in the medical setting, if we were in the emergency room, and we have, say, people connecting with folks who had overdosed, you know, and did survive. And then we're trying to, you know, we have maybe peers outreach folks or staff, you know, in those settings, and connecting them to what the services that we provide. What if you had someone who you find out that their sibling or a family member went into the emergency room and they didn't survive? Do we withhold the information? If a doctor found that, just got the medical reports of their patient, and they had cancer, and the cancer moved up to stage 3, should they not be told how severe it is? Because we want to take care of them. We don't want them to feel bad right now. Do we want to, if we have a client who comes in and said, and they're hoping that you're going to help them with all these different things, and you tell them to say, well, I'm going to help you address them. We have different ways to address your substance use disorder and the issues related to it, and we're going to help you to the best of our ability. That would be transparent. It would be different than saying, we're going to help you with all that, no problem. We have to do things within our capacity and be transparent. Folks, human beings need to know how to be human with other human beings. And the examples that you provide are the very things that are showing them, are instructing them, educating them how to do the same for themselves in their communities, because they're not going to be with you forever. So reflect the very values that you value and reflect those values with your clients so they can incorporate them in their life. So veracity is part of the ethics that we talk about here. Okay. How y'all doing right now? I don't want to get anybody depressed. I'm more hyped up than everybody else here, but not for nothing. We're already at a time where I think I need to give you a break. You folks okay with it taking a break? Raphael, you want to hang out with me some more?
He does, for sure.
All right, let's take 15 minutes and come back at let's come back at 13 minutes. Let's come back at 1:45, okay? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
So any comments, any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? I'm actually trying to keep this as simple as possible, but this is an interesting discussion, isn't it? Nobody agrees? Yeah, no? I tell you what, I am going to bring up a case study and I would like to ask for a volunteer to read, please.
Let's consider a client with a history of depression and suicidal ideation has been engaging successfully in substance use treatment over the past 3 months. However, recently they have experienced an unfortunate coincidence of extremely challenging life events because of their unstable living arrangement in a housing facility. The counselor has noticed problematic behaviors and thought patterns emerging and is seriously concerned about the client's mental health given the history. In order to have the client moved from their challenging living environment, the provider decides to recommend that the client be hospitalized for suicidal ideation, despite there being no actual sign of suicidal ideation and their client previously expressing the desire to avoid hospitalization.
Thank you, Saib. So identify if there is a cause for concern here. What do you folks think?
Yes.
Why? What would be the concern?
There was no actual signs of suicidal, and they admitted them for being suicidal.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
no
they got to
connection.
remove from their living environment. Okay. What else? What else with that? That's good. Let's keep going from there. What else?
It doesn't really address. Oh, sorry.
No,
Pedro,
go ahead.
It doesn't really address their living issue because let's say they go to the hospital and they get discharged. Where are they supposed to go after that?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Who else?
Did the client, I heard the client didn't want to get hospitalized?
That's right. And yet, look what happened.
Mhm.
So keep going with that. So let's keep building. So what else is concerned and what else is the other parts of everything we've mentioned so far?
Not person-centered. You're doing what you want to do, not what the client really, what the counselor doing what they wanted to do, not what the client really wanted.
That's right. So the provider was the one who made the decision. They did not include the client. They just made the decision for them. They dictated. What are the principles that got compromised here of what we just discussed before the break?
Autonomy.
Autonomy is one. What's the other one?
Do no.
Yeah, do no harm. So remember, this is a person who has had maybe some mental health issues here. Okay, so it's sharing that and making decisions for the person. No, where does it say that the person doesn't have the capacity to make decisions for themselves? And where does it say that it's okay for us to make decisions without incorporating their feedback? Where does it say that we have that kind of authority that we can take their autonomy. When there is no specific documented factors here that's expressed specifically that the person has suicidal ideation. Here what happens is the do no harm, which is the beneficence issue. The non-maleficence issues is the do no harm. And you can also see the other side of the coin is like to do good for somebody, that was compromised too. Because you're not doing good for the person unless the person is participating in their own process. If they have the capacity to make decisions, we're taking that decision. So we're compromising the autonomy. We are engaging in non-maleficence because we're making the decisions. Maybe sometimes in our heart of hearts, we might think that we really want to do something. We can help this person, and we want to try to do for them what they can't do for themselves because we were successful with other people in the past. But if they're not agreeing to it, if they're not told about it, if they're not participating in that when they have the capacity, then we just took over, we started to dictate. And then the other things is, I can't underscore this one enough. Respect is not just being rude, not being rude to somebody. Respect is including that person's perspectives and what they want to do. That's what respect is. So respect means something different for us as providers in the behavioral health field. It means we include the direction, the lead that they want to give us. Matter of fact, I could just, an easy way to understand that is put yourselves in their shoes. If you go to your own primary care doctor for some issues, and they decide for you without telling you what you're going to do, that they put you on some medication, that they set you up for surgery, or they give you some kind of treatment plan, that you got to do certain things without asking you, how would you feel? You're an adult, you can make decisions for yourself. You don't get the information, and somebody tells you that you have to do this, that you're getting set up for this. Just think about that for a second. Nobody has to have any feedback for that. So just imagine for the vulnerable populations we work with, when we do that, lots of times we can risk someone retreating into their thinking, and part of the issues that may have been reasons that may have played a part in their active addiction in the first place. Not to mention exacerbate mental health, their mental health conditions. So just something to think about. So I want to come up, and I'm going to put you folks in 3 groups. Clyde, you got me? 3 groups. Great. He's got the 3 or 4 participants. You know what I'm going to do? Can we do this for like 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes, Clyde? Because I'm seeing where I'm at, and I want to make sure I cover some of this information in the time that we have. Okay. So I'm going to put you in 3 different groups. And let me bring up the slide that you have to speak to. I'm going to try to put in. I don't know if I have it to put in the chat. Maybe you can do that for me, Clyde. So about self-disclosure, and considering this era that we are working in, where we have peer recovery advocates working with us, self-disclosure has had its own, it has its own impact in our community, in our settings. And it kind of really has a lot to do with your organizational practices or policies. But let's talk about that. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes, work in your groups. I want you to think about, is self-disclosure, if it's appropriate, why you think it is. Think of an example. If it's not appropriate, why is it not? And give an example as to why not. Okay? So in at least 3 considerations regarding self-disclosure. First, let's just do the first and second question, and we could do the third one when we come together in a group. So think about self-disclosure. Is it a good idea to do? It is not a good idea. Why or why not? Okay? Is that pretty clear? Right? Okay, so you're going to get put into 3 groups, and the button's going to come up. Just click on it. You're going to go into 3 groups. You're going to have 5 minutes to discuss why self-disclosure can be appropriate, why, and why it might not be appropriate. And think of examples that can go with it. Clyde, we ready? There you go. Click on join, please. Hi, everybody. It looks like everybody's back now. That's great. All right, thank you. So the question is, self-disclosure, if appropriate, why is it appropriate, and provide an example, or if it's not appropriate, why, and provide an example. So I would like to ask group one first, Gregory, Patton, Raphael, Sahib, and Tiffany. So is disclosure, is it appropriate, and why?
I told the group that self-disclosure as a counselor, you cannot, not supposed to do it. It's not, how you call it?
You said not overdo it, so that's a yes or no?
It's a no.
It's a no.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a yes, because it's part of forming the relationship. It's just the context that you do self-disclose. So you can self-disclose to a certain limit. You shouldn't self-disclose everything, but if it's in forming a relationship with the client, I thought it would be okay.
Right. And, you know, I said that in a group setting, I wouldn't self-disclose, but in a one-on-one session, if it's going to benefit the client, it would. But if
Yeah,
it's,
you
if
gotta
it,
remember.
Let him finish one at a time.
can you mute Raphael? Because, you know, in a one-on-one session, if it's gonna benefit the client, like I wouldn't self-disclose to bring the client down, to show that like I'm above him, you know, like, or above her, that look at me, if I could do it, you could do it type of thing. No. But if it's gonna benefit him and motivate her or him, right? Then I would self-disclose, but I'm not going to like self-disclose my whole life story. Only maybe on what that client shared to me and my experience on what he shared or what she shared to me.
Okay. Thank you, Gregory. Raphael, what did you want to add? What's your perspective? You're muted, dear.
Clients are going, even in a one-on-one setting, clients will immediately think that this is a friendship by you self-disclosing personal stuff about you. They'll misinterpret how that goes. So it's not recommended that you self-disclose as a counselor to the client.
Building of a rapport.
No, it's not. You're a professional. You have to remember that. As a counselor, you are, as a professional, there to help and to give guidance to the clients. You're not there to self-disclose.
Thank you, Raphael. Tiffany.
Again, I think it's okay, like taking it out of the counselor client. You have doctors and physicians that self-disclose to make a client feel comfortable with making choices that are best for them. You know, again, I think it's okay. It's just what you disclose.
Do you want to give an example
Okay,
of what, where, honey, wait a minute, we can't talk over each other, please. Hold on a second, let me finish saying what I'm saying, and then I'll give it right back to you, okay, Raphael? Give me an example, share an example of where it would be appropriate, where you folks think it would be appropriate.
Maybe a client sharing that they're currently homeless.
Okay.
And then maybe self-disclosing that you've been there and you know what it feels like. And this is what I did to get housing, or what route, what services or anything like that, community resources that I used or whatever. Something like that.
Okay.
I mean, it could be a whole lot of different scenarios.
That's true. That's why I was just asking for one example. That's,
you know, one example.
The example you gave, Gregory, happens to be one of many that many peer advocates use, because peer advocates use lived experience.
Okay.
Before we had the peer movement, what it has always been said in the field as to, if you disclose, and first of all, know your agency policies around that. And if you do disclose, it should be what you said, Gregory, to the benefit of the client.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to make sense. I understand what Raphael is saying. I'm not going to make assumptions that everybody's going to take things a certain way because I don't know them and I don't know everybody's capacity. So I stray away from that. But I do understand what Raphael is saying too, in terms of what you say, how you say it. And Tiffany, I mentioned that before. Because many times we could say, you know, I can understand that that could be really hard. I went through a similar situation. I said, but you know, but there's sometimes there's ways to get around things. What is something you think you can do for yourself? So I can actually share without really sharing, without giving the details. You've gone through this. I said, I've gone through something similar, you know, and what I did was I came out like this. What if, for instance, I had a colleague who came up, he was a volunteer. He was a client first, he was a volunteer. This is before the peer movement. He was a client first, he was a volunteer. He went into recovery and he was a social worker, became director and all this stuff. In that process, he was self-disclosing. It wasn't a policy that you couldn't. They actually didn't develop a policy till afterwards, but he used to self-disclose that he was in recovery, that it was possible to come out from where you're at and do better. But that's the approach he used. He did not say, I can do it, you can do it too, because everybody's in a different place. You know, everybody's in a different place and we don't want to make assumptions of that. But as a motivating factor, he did do that. And that was before the policies. After the policies, we started to stray away from self-disclosure until the peer movement came in. It really depends on how you do it. Is it going to help that client or are you tooting your own horn? You know? Yeah, Raphael.
That's what the peer movement was made for, that, for lived experiences. So again, I lost my train of thought. But the peer movement was made for that, for the self-disclosure, because that's how they talk about the lived experiences. That's why it's two different things, the counselor and the peer advocate.
Guys, I'm going to say that you should really know what your agency policies are around that. Different agencies will allow that and not frown on it if it's used appropriately. Just know what your agency policies are. And I don't know what Emma Bowen's policy.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Everybody's recovery is unique and it's different. So what worked for me it might not work for you. How I was homeless and what I did to get out of my homelessness might not work for you. So you might be creating, you might give them a false sense of hope and a false guidance in telling them this is what I did. Because it might not work for them. They might go do it and it might not work out for them. And then what happens is they're gonna come at you, oh, but you told me to do this. You said it'll work out this way. You see,
but if it's presented in a way to provide motivation,
yeah, you gotta know how to present it.
I can understand that.
That's why there's trainings for that. You gotta know how to present it.
Exactly. So see, so you're kind of in there. You're kind of agreeing with that. Okay, Sahib.
Would this be an example of like disclosure used in a positive way? And Tiffany gave this example where a lot of our clients see the work they do and they're like, I want to be a counselor, I want to do this and that. And you kind of explain to him like what the process is behind it. Like you have to get your education, you have to do this and that, but also giving them that autonomy. Like if this is something you want to do, these are the steps you have to be aware of. Would that be an example of disclosure or?
I'm sorry, repeat that again. Say that again. I didn't capture everything.
I'm sorry. So like a lot of our clients see the work we do and they're like, oh, I want to be a peer. I want to be a counselor. I want to be that, this and that. And we give them the education, like you have to go to school, you have to do a program. And I think, you know, Tiffany said in our group that part of the disclosure could be, it's not always easy. You might have to work in places where people are actively using, like, how is that going to affect you? And talk to them about like, what are the consequences or things you're going to face? Would that be an example of it or?
Actually, that's a really good way of presenting the pros and cons.
Okay.
People can make decisions. You know, and like for peers or for addiction counselors, especially addiction counselors, there was a time where Oasis was not nowhere near involved the way they are right now. And counselors were disclosing all the time because it was motivating. It was the folks, they were the folks working the field and they were the folks that getting folks into treatment and people were staying clean behind that. So I'm not going to discount that, you know. But then when they started to get into legal matters and ethical issues, because now we're talking about legal implications. If you said something, I'm going to hold you to it, or I'm going to take the agency to court. And here comes the Justice Center. And in your heart of hearts, you're trying to be helpful. Well, it kind of depends on how you do it. Remember one of the first slides I had was there's no clear-cut, concise, templated approach to every ethical issue that comes up. Kind of depends. Depends on what you say and how you present it and what the motive is for you presenting it. One of the things that we could consider, right, is if we're looking to incite motivation, and we could always talk about, well, there's different people that find different ways to work with their situations. Some folks may have a really hard time and may take longer. Some folks might have an easier time. I can't say how it would be for you, but there's different things we offer, and maybe you would like to try that. Or I could say, I know like all of us survived the pandemic. How could we not use that as a lived experience? This is, we all survived the pandemic. Maybe some of us are still trying to process that. So if you're going through that, I totally understand that. I says, what can we do to help service you, to help support you? What do you think you can do? Like, I can relate. The person can know that I understand to the degree that I've had on my own issues. Not that I know their pain or their challenges, because that's theirs. I don't own that. I will never tell somebody says, I understand. No, I says, I can relate to it because I've seen folks in my world and in my life go through some of the similar challenges. But there are some options here that maybe we can offer you. Could you consider it? Maybe you'd like to talk about them. Some people do get better, So it's all about, and Raphael did agree to this, just like Gregory was saying, it's like, it really is about what you present and how you present it. And Tiffany, you were saying it's for the benefit of the person. It's about inciting motivation. It doesn't mean that every process is the same, because we know no two clients are the same. We know no two counselors are the same. No two anybody's are the same. So disclosure, one of the best things to do when it comes ethically is to really consider what your agency says about that. What does your agency kind of encourages or discourages? At least be mindful, at least be aware of what the agency says, and then work with that. It's not a bad idea to sometimes say, well, I know some folks who've tried certain options. This one didn't work for them, but it did work for some. This one worked for some people, so this one didn't work for others. Like, don't even have to put yourself in that position at all. You can also refer to other persons in the third, from the third person perspective, and still be credible and tell the truth. But you don't have to give all the detail, but it's more about inciting motivation. And if someone doesn't, it's okay to say, you know what, you don't feel that way? I totally respect that. Where can we go from here? But disclosure is a tricky thing. It's never a yes or no. It's not a clear answer. Let me see. Group 2. What's a consideration regarding self-disclosure? We spoke about this, but what hasn't been mentioned? What else do we have to consider from self-disclosure? When we do self-disclosure, other than the benefit for the person, what else might come up?
What group was I? 2?
Well, sometimes
Christy, Margaret, and Pedro.
Oh, I don't remember which group.
sometimes a client can use what you disclose against you. Like, it does more harm to the relationship than good. Especially if they don't get their way.
Right, so that's why it's important to be mindful of what you're disclosing, right? And if it's going to be beneficial to the client in that moment. I know we discussed that because it does help build, trust and rapport, but you also have to be mindful of what you're sharing and how much.
Yeah.
That's what we discussed. I don't know if Pedro wants to add anything.
Because you might disclose one thing to one client, and then you disclose another thing to another client. So it's just about all the clients speak to each other, and it's gonna come out in the open, no matter what.
Yeah, so it has to be something that you're comfortable with, even self-disclosing to begin with, because it's true.
Yeah, because once it's out there, you can't take it back.
Right.
It's like the internet. You just it's the same thing, So that kind of speaks back to what Raphael was saying earlier. It's like sometimes, it's really how you say what you're going to say. What is it? You can actually share from what share that certain things, you've gone through certain things yourself too without giving details. You won't, if you have to do that, if it takes so much energy and you have to kind of really process that out, then maybe it's just easier to just don't do it. Go ahead, Raphael.
It's like dealing with grief, and because a lot of clients have dealt with loss.
Yeah.
You know, but that's a personal journey. You know what I'm saying? And you know, you can also say, yeah, I've dealt with loss. I've dealt with loss. You know, in that way. But to put it out there, oh, my mother died, and that's that's personal. You can disclose, yeah, I've dealt with loss, and me dealing with loss is what helped me. You know, and give them some type of example or some type of suggestion to help them. But that's a personal journey. Grief is a personal journey.
Mhm.
So
It's individualized, very much so. I'm going to piggyback on something that Pedro brought up. So picture this. So we self-disclose something to benefit one particular client. They happen to share with the other one. And that person shares it with the next one. Then that person shares it with somebody else. By the time it gets to the third or fourth person, something completely different. Guess what? Justice Center is tapping on our door. We're getting emails. Hey, there's an issue that you are being charged with such and such because this is what the clients are saying that you told them. And so it doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, but it does mean that it can put you in a position where you have to go through this whole hassle and go through the whole process with the Justice Center and to just kind of clear your name. So the ramifications can be legally, not just ethically, but legally can be really daunting. What else is another consideration? What else? How can this be a consideration, good or bad? Or indifferent? This is group 3. That's Cindy, Dominique, and Genesis. And one more consideration about self-disclosing.
I thought it could be, self-disclosure could be good. It could, as long as it benefits the client. Just depend on what you can disclose. If it's good to benefit the client, like it was said in the other groups, it just depends on what you say, because once it's out in the open, you can't take it back.
Right. Okay. So anything else that you would add to that? Any other consideration other than what we've already mentioned that your group will want to consider sharing?
I think it also depends your motives, right? If you're not doing it because for you, it's more, like we've said before, benefiting the client. And then I think where it can go wrong is where the client will say, use it against you, right? They can flip it like, oh, but you were just a junkie. I'm just giving an example, whatever. You were just like me, and how you're going to help me. So they could flip it. So I think it's important, like you said, knowing agency policies, right? Knowing your motives behind doing it, right? Am I doing it because I really feel that this is going to help the client, or am I doing it because I want to boast about myself? So I think it's things that you need to really look into when if you're going to self-disclose, right? Because like you said before, it was most counselors became counselors because they weren't recovering. Like it's shifted now, right? Now it's like, that's why the peer movement, and there's more education involved, and it's different. But I shared in my group, I said, I know at clinician tech, they say you shouldn't, right? But I often do if I feel like it's going to help, and it's about how you say it and what I feel like why you're saying.
It took it's not something that we readily are able to do unless we practice. It's not unless we understand the different dynamics. So it may be a challenge for some of us. I think if we remember, and we try not to forget that when folks come in, they are vulnerable for a lot of different reasons. It's not just that they haven't lived outside of abstinence, where there's more structure in life and there is more goal-mindedness, and there are opportunities to achieve things. Active addiction can be very, very different per person, but many times it has isolation, has a conditioned thinking because the neurological processes work a certain way. The coping skills are not the healthiest for the most part. And so if we remember that when we are disclosing, depending where a person is at, it's also a part of what we want to consider, because when someone comes in, they're not just vulnerable, they're also, their capacity to process information can be very limited. Now, I'm not going to use absolute comments or statements here, but it can be very limited in what we say and how we explain it. And even though we say for the reason that we're saying it for, it can be interpreted and taken in a negative way for the other person's part, because their capacity for thinking, for processing, for internalizing can be that compromised. So that's the other consideration I want to also offer us to consider. Sometimes it's about motivating folks, and we can do that with lived experiences, depending on where they're at in their recovery process. Sometimes when somebody's coming in and they're early on in their process, you might want to consider what it is you're going to say and how you're going to say it, because folks are going to internalize it through their lens, not the way you intended. They may internalize it through their lens. So there's a lot of gray areas with us, so kind of just understand, you mentioned the important things, benefit the person, and to help them, but also know how you say it also. And so things that can happen, because we don't want it to to create a backlash. So that was a good discussion, and that there are times that with self-disclosure, that in the therapeutic environment, it refers to a conscious, intentional strategy to develop trust, which is everything that you folks were talking about. Part of developing that relationship, as Tiffany first said. So it could be considered a boundary issue, or the crossing of boundaries, when someone goes into kind of putting themselves in an opportunity where the client may see them like where they're at, like someone else mentioned, and not see necessarily, I think it was Christine that mentioned, is that you don't necessarily have the capacity to help them. Or Raphael, you don't necessarily have the capacity to help them, because now they don't see you as a counselor, as the person who has expertise and knowledge and education. They see you as just somebody who also needs help like them. So their trust may be compromised. So, but unnecessary and burdening disclosures are boundary violations. There are times where, and I'm not thinking any of you folks, but there was a time where providers or addiction counselors would share their situations, and then they would come back and piggyback on it during different other interactions and counseling sessions. And sometimes their issues, would be challenging, and they present that personal stuff to the client. The client can feel bad enough for them, for the counselor, might really like that counselor, but it's not fair to that person to feel any kind of weight of any stuff that we go through. And that's a clear boundary issue. And that's for folks, and that's why I said before about, it takes a little practice to understand how to present certain things if we're going to present them, and how we make sure that it's to benefit the individual, and not get caught up in that, and that person also all of a sudden becomes a confidant and we share all kinds of personal stuff. That's not what we're there. That's not doing them any harm. That's really, that's not doing them good. That's really doing them harm. And we're not helping ourselves. We are crossing our own boundaries. It's not even them. It's not fair to them. They're not there to help be our soundboard. And so that has happened over time. And so self-disclosures do have their place. Inevitable disclosures do happen, like your professional background. Any client can ask you, what's your experience like, where you've worked before, how long you've been in the field, and all about your credentials. Some folks are very informed. Not all our clients come in for the first time, in the last legs. There are a lot of folks who do come in with understanding, there are different criteria, different competencies that you come in with. And so they can certainly, ask about it, and we are supposed to be transparent in sharing that. There's also the therapeutic orientation, which really speaks to as kind of like a different way of looking, at behavior. So like, what's the process? Like I mentioned before, that some agencies back in the day used to use a therapeutic community approach, which has been evident, and the research has been saying for a long time, and we don't see it anymore, that therapeutic community approaches are not helpful. They can exacerbate addiction for a lot of folks. There were some really harsh practices. So what is the therapeutic orientation? Is it recovery oriented? Is it more clinical in nature in terms of a different disciplines? Will that person need cognitive behavioral therapy, or are they going to just need, are they going to need trauma supportive trauma supportive interventions? You know, so the process, or maybe psychoanalysis for therapy to help them while they are in your treatment program. Understanding what kind of approach the services are supposed to take can be something you can be transparent with your clients about. And so here's the other one about sexual relationships. No sexual relationships, no sexual activity with clients, families, or former clients, or including e-relationships. Now I'm making an absolute statement. I don't want to, but why would why is it not okay to have a sexual relationship, at least not with somebody who's not in care right now, but they already completed the program 3 months ago? Why would that not be a good idea? Oh, come on, this is a fun one.
I think the first thing is that, you know, if you work with this person, you're kind of in a position of power where like all the things they went through, emotional stuff, you can put the client in like a very vulnerable position. I mean, first off, just having like a sexual relationship with a client, I think it's just like a lot of legal things by itself, but actually engaging with it, it's going to do more harm than good to them in the future, because I feel like it causes codependence, and that's not really a healthy thing in my opinion.
Right. And it's like taking advantage of somebody who's in a vulnerable place.
Like, I don't even, if I'm with a male client, I can shut my door. But if I'm having a session with a female client, I leave my door halfway cracked or it's open. I don't never shut my door when I have a female client in my office. Never, never have.
Okay.
And if they need to discuss any like female conversations, I usually let them know that if they feel uncomfortable speaking to a male counselor on whatever subject it is that a female client needs to talk about, I'll let them know that there's a female counselors that they can talk to if they need to share something personal that they don't want to talk about with a male client, with a male counselor.
Makes sense, because I know a lot of times you folks, you know what we used to, I remember when I was doing direct services, they didn't, my agencies, the ones I was at, did not always take into account, oh, because I'm the female, they'll give me female clients. They used to give me Latino clients because I was the one that spoke Spanish. But they gave me everybody. These days they just kind of just put, well, you got one lesson on your caseload, you get the next one. Unfortunately. The idea here is that sexual relation with, Christy has said it before, I said they're vulnerable people. This is a vulnerable population. They're coming into treatment. Sometimes they're mandated, sometimes they come in on their own, but they're in their last legs. They are coming in because they need help. And I just mentioned their mental status, that it's not working the way it would with someone who hasn't been using drugs for a long time. So those work, my mind is not necessarily working to its healthiest. I like the approach that Gregory used, and he gave an example of something you could do. It's like just to make sure that it's not a situation with that person, and you can leave the door open. Ask that person's permission. I would do that for everybody. Is it okay to open the door? Is it okay for us to talk in private with the door closed? You let me know. You know, and I know that agencies do go out of their way to kind of talk about where the client sits, you know, because sometimes we don't know about whether they're mental health issues, but we certainly don't want to be too close. Space is an issue. Even culturally, space can be an issue, but we don't want to give the wrong idea. So we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but like you said, the wrong idea. You know, like sometimes I have a lot of donations, right? And it occurred to me that if I give like female clients like donations, and they may look at that as Gregory being real nice to me, giving me donation. So I don't do it in a way where they would get that look from me, you know? So I would do it where I give it to a few of them at the same time. Like I don't particularly always give the same person always that a donation or things like that, because I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea or send them the wrong message. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can do things for a client and then they will look at that as, oh, maybe, I just don't like when they get the wrong message. And so I don't like to, feed out that wrong message. So I try to like nip it in the bud and, that's just the way I am.
No, thanks for sharing that. So the vulnerability for folks who come into treatment also includes that you might be the one person, the first person, since they've been clean, since they've been abstinent, rather, I shouldn't say clean, abstinent, that has someone acting and treating them with kindness. And so while they are trying to learn the different way of living and learning structure in their life and learning or relearning skills, that they may have forgotten for a long time, that vulnerability also includes a certain about, it can be also emotionally, physically, certainly spiritually, and it's easy to confuse kindness with someone likes me. And so particularly early on in the recovery process, when that brain is still kind of learning how to function appropriately. And so the way we can do, the examples that Gregory gave, and also how we can reiterate our responsibilities, our role, how we serve, provide services, and certainly how we speak and how we engage. All of that helps to, and reiterating that every once in a while is not a bad way to keep the boundaries up. Healthy, connected, but not necessarily emotionally connected. So we're supposed to be friendly. We're not necessarily supposed to be friends. So in our ways of interacting. And so there's a lot of things we talk about. That's on the non-maleficence and doing harm really comes up here. And so client populations who are vulnerable, it can break down the therapeutic process, the therapeutic relationship. It's how do you help someone when they are seeing you in a very different light? Instead of you being a support, you become something else, something emotional or something psychologically filling a gap. It creates role reversal. So there's a lot of confusion around boundaries. And again, one of the things that you're doing is also showing how to be able to, the different ways of interacting so they can mimic that in their world so they can navigate through their days and through their life in their communities. It can increase when someone is giving them a wrong idea and acting in a way where it's not just very clearly professional. It can help someone feel like, oh, you led me on. And now you're saying that you don't really like me, and then they can interpret it as a way to go to have a recurrence or exacerbate mental health issues. And so we don't do that. And anybody who, and I would say, because I know, I'm thinking of a specific situation where a colleague, he was kind of new in the field and he got attracted to this female. And he kind of just justified being able to have a relationship, and he did get involved with her. And after because she had left the program, and they got involved in a relationship. And what that does for us as providers, as addiction professionals, is it doesn't help us to be able to discern between people we're helping and people we can connect with for our own needs. So if we're addressing our own needs with the client population that's vulnerable, we're taking advantage of people. It also says a lot about us. If we're not able to have boundaries, we're not necessarily in the place to be objective, so we're not able to help somebody else. If we're helping us and we're putting ourselves first, in any kind of way, and this is one of the ways that we as addiction professionals can do that, we're not only taking advantage of that person, but we got some issues too. If I'm not objective enough to know what the boundaries are, to understand that, listen, I have a life and there are people I can meet that it shouldn't be my client population. I've got some stuff to resolve, and I don't need to be helping anybody because I put myself in a position where I can hurt someone. And so that the client impact could be so, it could be so many, come from so many different ways. And so we want to, let's move on to saying fidelity. Fidelity involves the notions of loyalty and faithfulness and honoring commitments. This is really talking about what we do as counselors. We want to be able to to do what we say we're going to do, or at least follow through of what we initially represented the organization and our role to be. We want to do that. And so the counselor has to take care not to threaten the therapeutic relationship. It's really important for us to be very specifically focused on our goal, on what our responsibilities are, and be able to be trustworthy and not take advantage of these populations. And so that's where that trustworthiness and transparency come in. And so here I'm just going to go through a few slides because we have a little bit left. Mandated reporters, you're legally required to report suspicion of child abuse and neglect. Something that Raphael said earlier that I wanted to that I want to piggyback on here is, I know sometimes there are some providers outside of the addiction field that I've worked with where they are very nervous about reporting abuse, thinking that that mother or that parent has had some challenges that maybe they're given time, they should be fine. And they didn't want to call ACS into the picture because that would be a long process for them. And so they had all kinds of really weird reasons as to not become a mandated reporter in a particular incident. What is the very thing that we can risk if we don't report abuse or neglect of a child?
Your credentialing.
That's a good point. What else?
Something can happen to the child.
Exactly.
You know, I'm glad that this came up because this is a conversation we have a lot of, you know, you develop a rapport with your client and then you don't, you know, sometimes there's like this thing that you feel like you're breaking some kind of trust or something inside the relationship you have with that client. So I know that that's come up a lot for us in like, you know, our case conferences, like we are mandated reporters and it has to be, right? Because it's like the welfare of the child. And we've seen that a lot of times people are hesitant to make that phone call to ACS.
So when someone is hesitant, seeing how you're a supervisor, when someone is hesitant, which can naturally happen, whether somebody's new in the field or depending on the context of that situation or relationship, what can someone do if they're hesitant?
Offer to walk them through the process.
They can do that. Can they also come see you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do it together. Yeah. And do supervision and
go to the supervisor. Exactly. Go to the leadership and find out, wait a minute, I am not sure about this. What do you think? So that way you don't feel like you're guilty. You don't have to own the guiltiness, the guilty feelings of I had to do this. You know, because if that's an issue while you're processing that, there's a situation that needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. How do I handle this? I'm not sure. What else can we do? And this is for everybody. What else can we do? I have one more suggestion. What else can we do when, in terms of mandating reporting in our clients, and to be able to still maintain that relationship with our clients? All right, I'll tell you. It's okay. I know you're dying to know. So the one thing we could do is remember, we can reiterate the do's and don'ts, the responsibilities of the client, the responsibilities the agency has, and we as a role, and in our role, right? We can also bring that up every once in a while. It's like, when situations come up, I am mandated to report. I just want to make sure that, that we don't forget that. Is it, so just in case, you shared certain things with me, I may have to report. If you're going to hurt somebody or someone else or hurt yourself, Or especially when we have the confidentiality conversation, that's a great time to bring it up. It says, or if there's some kind of like child neglect issue, I by law, and according to the job and what they hired me to do, I have to report if there's some issues of neglect. So I just want to make sure that you know that. Reiterating that every once in a while, particularly in situations that have a lot of instability, that might be the very thing that can prompt the person to be more on top of, or to at least ask for help when they need it. But at least they also know that you're being transparent, and they've already been informed maybe a couple of times that these things can happen. But it's a good way for them to get help, okay? But that's a way where we can at least make the other person be aware, but inform every once in a while. So those are the 3 things I would say. If you don't do it, and it comes out later that there was a situation, or maybe nothing happened to the child, but there was some malnutrition issues for a while. It affected their illness, and then now they're better, and it comes out later on. It could still come back and bite you. Document, and report when you need to. So when do you do that? As soon as possible. And so you are immune from civil liability when you do report. It's just done in confidential, with anonymity. And if you don't report, you can be charged with a misdemeanor. So the privacy and confidentiality piece, to go with that, this is some of the issues that came up, especially during the pandemic. So the HIPAA new rule regarding emails, it's not a new rule anymore, it's old already. So privacy rule allows providers to communicate electronically with patients. One of the things I do happen to know from doing direct services when I was doing that, it was some of the stuff that you guys were doing, is that we had so many different protections in place to be able to communicate with clients when we did. There has to be some safeguards, like checking email and sending the email alert. And some agencies I work with, you can send emails outside. Some you could because you had to connect with some resources. Some you can, or some email systems were only internal. The whole idea here is about privacy. You have to be in compliance with the 45 CFR, parts 164 subpart C. I don't know if that's changed, but that's what I had when this was developed. You have to be provide email reminders to patients if they consent, and everything has to be by consent. And that's usually part of the first session when we first meet someone, and we explain how the program works, what their preferred language is, what they can expect on our part and from you as the counselor and the agency. And so some of the considerations, if the counselor tests positive for COVID, tests positive for HIV, tests positive for any kind of thing, any kind of health issue that is on site, you want to be able to understand who needs to know and who they want to inform. Let me see, this is more for COVID stuff. Let me go into dual relationships for the last few minutes I got. So what are dual relationships? What do you folks think? I'm not talking about sexual relationships. What do you folks define dual relationships as?
It's when you already have a relationship with a person outside of the clinical setting. So let's say, for example, you're meeting with a client that's a neighbor or a family member or a brother or sister that might compromise your ability to work with them.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Anything else for anybody?
Counselors that attend 12-step meetings.
That's such a good one. That's right. Know your policies around that and understand how do you work around that if that's an issue. So I've had friends who, so I come from a recovery world. My husband's coming up on his 29 years in a few weeks. Yay for him. That's why we're still married. That's part of the, duties of society. You gotta stay in recovery. No, I'm kidding. He knows I talk about him all the time. One of the things that you want to consider is that when you're in recovery and you work in the field, how are you? What happens when someone goes into 12-step meetings? When you greet someone, tends to happen, you get a hug, right? Or what you talk about. There's an expectation of confidentiality in there, but not necessarily if that's your client and you're talking about your business. So these are different considerations that you have to take into account. And does the person hug you? I mean, we already have that issue in our setting. When there's sometimes when we have like, you ever had I don't know if you folks do this, but some of the agencies I worked in the past during the holidays, either from the Thanksgiving part or the other holidays, we have a potluck type thing, not just staff, but with clients too. Everybody brings a meal. And then, if people are happy, people tend to hug, Happy New Year, haven't seen you since last year, which was last week, things like that. And so how do we work around that? Those things can come up, those things can be boundary crossings. So because someone can say that you put your arm on them and can come back and charge you with sexual harassment. So understanding what you intend, what you motivate, and how you might respond to someone may be taken very differently. And so things like that, so dual relationships can come from, say, what if somebody for Christmas holidays, one of the things that they do is they sell these little knickknacks on the side so they can make a couple extra dollars. And they come to your agency and they want you to sell. Maybe they're selling Avon, maybe they're selling something else. And they come into your agency because all the different clients, tend to, buy from them. Do we buy from them? That could be a dual relationship. What if, like what I said in the beginning, when I said, oh, Cindy's mom's a hairstylist. So I want Cindy to put in a good word for me so I can get a discount. So when I get my services outside, but Cindy's my client. Dual relationships. Some places in New York State, there are some places, the towns are so small that when you do go put your car in the mechanic might have one of the helpers might be one of your clients. Sometimes you can't avoid certain things, but what you can do is reiterate the boundaries. Dual relationships are not helpful. It can confuse the person who you're providing services to. And so it's like a second role, becoming a worker, friend, a teacher, business associate, or family member. Sometimes a family member, somebody knows somebody and said, can you take in my nephew because he's having a hard time? And I happen to know that my good friend is the director of one of the programs. And so they push that person in front of other people. Dual relationships can have fallback. And so the dangers can include impairing a worker's objectivity, okay? It can be damaging to the relationship. It confuses the roles and responsibilities, not just for the clients, but also for the professional. It can limit your ability to confront clients when you have to bring up issues and address it with them. It could be a violation of agency policy. I always go to that first. Matter of fact, I used to always say, well, no, that's not what, leadership in this agency say this, and that. It may be unethical, in some cases even illegal, but the reality is you're supposed to be friendly, but not your client's friend. So other unethical practice may also include like patient gossip, agency gossip. It does happen from time to time where 2 or 3 counselors may be very familiar with one particular person, but gossiping, not being able to be clinically therapeutic and supportive for a particular case, it's different from gossiping. And so that's not ethical practice. Never borrow money from a client. And geez, I know too many situations where folks have done that. You're losing your objectivity. All of this is losing your objectivity. It doesn't put you in position to help other folks. Buying the merchandise from a client, we tend to frown upon that. Attend to the children while the client runs a quick errand. We don't do that because we need to be supportive of clients being self-empowerment and self-efficacy, but we don't do those. We have to have clear boundaries so nothing gets confused. Here's the other thing about it is every time, even just some basic, ABCs is, when we do a favor for someone, they may come back and want another favor. So we don't do these things in the first place because we're not their friends. We're just friendly and we do care. but we put up the boundaries and we can reiterate that so the other person can understand. So here I'm going to go through here. There's some telepractice and telehealth. I'm going to send you these slides so you can have them. There's some standards that OASIS had updated in 2019. I'm not sure if they've updated since. Listen, the last thing I want to leave you all with is when in doubt, formulate the problem. When you have a situation and there's questions, you're not sure how to move forward, or the person seems to get certain information confused that you've shared with them, and you've already started to develop a rapport with them, assess the situation, give, state the facts, formulate the problem, gather as much as information you can, and talk to supervisors and leadership and your colleagues. You might be a leadership. Talk to your colleagues. Everybody, if the idea is to run things by other people, we're not the only one that has a particular perspective. We have other experienced persons that also have their perspectives, and then you can make an informed decision yourself depending on what other folks are sharing with you. That way you can consider the different alternatives in place. That way you can make an ethical assessment and an informed decision. I also want to say that the best time for you to be objective and for you to make the best decision is when you're taking care of yourself. One thing I love saying is your ethical responsibility to take care of yourself. If you're going to be in the people helping field, you have to take care of you. If you can't take care of you, you're not in the best position to be objective and supportive for someone else who needs support. And so it ends and it begins and ends with you. Always try to, and I know we can be overwhelmed. I know sometimes we have too many client losses at one time. Sometimes we have such an overwhelming schedule. The whole addiction discipline all over, all right, is understaffed, underworked, and undermanned. And overwhelmed with clients who do need help. And so your own wellness is so important. So your emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is your responsibility to be as grounded as you can be, so you can be in the field that you love in order to help someone else. So under professional development, OASIS stresses the need for self-care. Counselor impairment can happen, and sometimes we don't always see it for ourselves. This is a good time when we can be aware, hey, if a colleague who happens to have become a friend in our setting seems to be a little off from how they usually are, their demeanor or their attitude, we can always ask, check in with each other and find out, are you okay? You seem to be a little off, this doesn't seem like you. And then just a little supportive pull-up like that can be so helpful for that individual. We don't always know that we're not necessarily doing on our best game. So wellness guidelines can include a lot of different things. Just don't forget that you have a life. I will say one of the things that I've always talked about, work-life balance. When I do self-care, compassion fatigue type of trainings, we talk about, work-life balance. I've been switching that around. Really would rather us start looking at life-work balance. Just because I spend most of my time at the job doesn't mean that that has to be the most important thing. The most important thing should be my life. I should be working to support the life that I have. And so change your perspective and change what you do. So because if you don't take care of you, you can't take care of other people. And then you are not doing this because anybody mandated you. You're doing this because you like this. You're doing this because you love to work with people. You do this because you care. So then practice some of those same things you do for them, turn it around and practice it on yourself.
We'll check the stuff.
I like that.
Okay. All right. I don't have any last comments, any kind of last ideas. I know we were not always on the same page on everything, but it does get tricky with ethical situations, doesn't it? That's why we have guidelines. That's why I put the Canon ethical principles in the chat box, because when we're not sure, when we see things a certain way, someone else might see it another way. Let's go by the guidelines. I love to say, that's what the boss says. I love to blame the leadership. Listen, no, that's what they tell me to do. I'll keep my relationship with my client. I'll just blame it on the leadership. Sorry, Christy, Cindy.
We get it all day.
But I would say, no, this is what our policy is in this agency. But this gives them an opportunity to understand how things work in the community. So it's always a helpful thing. But just don't forget that you are involved in that process too. To take care of them, you got to take care of you. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for your participation. I got some lively conversations today. I got some real spirited people here today, right, Raphael? And so, and thank you everybody for getting involved and making sure everybody spoke, which I'm really happy about. So one last thing I'm going to leave you with. We're gonna sign off now. Now, in order for you to get certificates, right? Can everybody put their names in here again? In order to get certificates, we will send out an evaluation link. So my colleague will be back next week. She'll start sending those out, and it's a link for an evaluation for this course. And once you fill that out, then she's gonna send you the certificates and the copy of the slides. Okay? So I'm sorry she'll have to chase you down, but please do that, you know, and your attendance list is you guys signing out right now. Okay? And if you have any issue, you guys have my email address. You can just shoot me an email and I'll respond to any questions. Okay?
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.